like to welcome you all tonight to the second Global Public Health Lecture. Tonight we have Kevin Deitel, who is a Peace Corps representative here on campus. My name is Chris Sigler. Peter Kern can't be here tonight. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, so we thought I might be able to introduce Kevin. We'll see how well I do. One thing I want to mention now is next week's lecture. Again, every Wednesday night, Kirsten Tucker, who was in the Global Grizzly program, a student here in the Global Grizzly program, went to Uganda as a volunteer, is now in medical school, and she's going to come back and talk about her experiences as a volunteer in a Uganda hospital. I think we had a couple people last year that did that, and it was pretty interesting to hear their reactions to that visit. One other announcement, make sure that you sign in. Peter has donated a book, a recent book that he's published, and it will be given away at the end of the year in a drawing. And anytime you sign in, you get one ticket in the box. So you'll have an opportunity to get that book. To Kevin. Kevin, supremely qualified as a Peace Corps representative. He's been in the Peace Corps 3 times. First in Lesotho in 1996 to 1998, in South Africa from 2003 to 2005, and again in the Philippines from 15 to 18 of this year. And if you think that's too much peace for you, he was also in the Air Force in Desert Storm. So he's got a very balanced resume. He also taught as a principal in Japan for 6 years. So he's got a wealth of overseas experience, and anybody who's been overseas for a while, it doesn't take long before you get a sense of the healthcare system in the country that, as a Peace Corps volunteer, you're serving in, which was generally non-existent, or in Japan, where they have a very specialized healthcare system, completely different from ours. So I'm looking forward, and I hope you'll welcome Peter or Kevin with me.
Thank you very much. I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm very excited by this. I'm getting a wait 1 second moment. Wait 1 second. Do you want to put both of them on?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
You need
I was
both.
prepared to just project, but now I will be wearing 2 mics. So I think that's better. Good, because I want you to understand that most of the people that are sitting at the back right now are from the class that I'm supposed to be in right now. So if this looks like a decent-sized crowd, as Chris said, I brought along some ringers. So give me 1 second here. Is that better? Is that okay? I can move it up. It's cool. I don't care about the back row. I'm here for the people that are right up front. Is that good? Everybody's good? Great. All right, I'm going to try and put this somewhere where it won't fall out of my pocket. Yes. As mentioned just a little bit ago, I am what's called the Campus Peace Corps representative. I like to say, when I tell people that, when I introduce myself, I like to make a point of saying that I am not a recruiter. I feel that a recruiter does something very different. That's mostly because, like was said also earlier, I was in the military, and so I know how recruiters work and how they behave. My function here on campus is basically to be a representative, or as I like to think of it, as a guide or a counselor. If any of you, and I'm not just looking at the young people, and I'm not just looking at some of you, are interested in this at all, my role in that is basically to give you advice on how you can get into the Peace Corps. With that in mind, I'll go ahead and flip a slide here. There's no remote, so I'm going to have to keep stepping back over to the computer to change slides. Actually, though, before we do that, I have a quick question. Could you raise your hand if you used to be a volunteer? Ooh, very good. Very nice. A Peace Corps volunteer specifically. Could you raise your hand if you used to be a Peace Corps volunteer and you were in the health area? Okay, great. That's where I flipped the slide, because there's a couple things that I need to point out at the start. The idea here, and again, this is a global public health seminar, is that basically this has something to do with public health. Full disclosure, I actually am in the education department. And so my experiences as far as the Peace Corps go are not necessarily limited to, but we're more focused on education in general. If you want details, if you want specifics about what it's like to be a health volunteer, or if you think you might go into public health, I think basically I would go first to the two ladies who raised their hands a little bit earlier. And I know both of them, I think, are not, I'm sorry, at the back. If you have questions, by all means, ask them for specifics. I'll give you some ideas here, and I can tell you things that I did that were well within the health area, within the Peace Corps. But again, as you can see on the board here, all 3 times that I went into the Peace Corps, I basically worked in education. Oh, and I forgot there's one other thing. Raise your hand if you used to work for the Peace Corps. There he is. See? Thank you very much, sir. Yes, I did it 3 times. Why? Because I'm insane. No. Basically because it fit what I felt like in my life, and also I feel like after the first time, I was confident in saying that this is a program I can really get behind. And so I do think it's unusual to meet somebody who's done 3 Peace Corps tours, but I know that there are people who have done more. So I'm going to go for the record. Yeah, why don't I just go ahead and jump into this. Here's what I would like to talk about for this hour. Basically, we need to talk a little bit about what the Peace Corps is. And I say that mostly because there are folks in the audience who are international students, and they might not know exactly what the Peace Corps does. At the same time, I do find that, in my experience, this is an awful generalization to make, but occasionally younger people don't know exactly what the Peace Corps is or how it works. And so with your permission, I'd like to start out by more or less explaining how it works and how you get in. This kind of goes back to my side of the adventure here. My goal, again, is to try and support you if you decide you want to do this. And it's probably important to say exactly what the Peace Corps is before we get much into the details. After that, I want to talk about what health volunteers do, because, again, that particular area is specific and has its own specific goals. As a sort of a subtext to that, talk about programs and sample projects that are available. And then I'll follow that with some of my own experiences, because I did do, like I said, I did do some work that was sort of technically in the health arena, even though I was there technically to focus on education. The last part is called questions, comments, concerns, or complaints, at which point you may point out any problems or errors that I made, and I'm happy to acknowledge them. And if there's time at the end, and that depends on you guys, I actually have some pictures that are of me. I had more hair. What I was doing in schools while I was there. So for the benefit of the people who are at the back, who are in my education class, you'll be able to see some pictures of what it's like to work in a very small village as an education volunteer. And if at any time you have any questions, you don't have to wait until the end. Throw your hand in the air, and I will entertain them. Moving on. Obviously, this is the first step. As I mentioned, we need to talk about what the Peace Corps is. The person that you see in this picture is a Peace Corps volunteer. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, there's 2 people there. Which one's the volunteer? I'll let you figure it out. While you're figuring it out, what is the Peace Corps? Basically, it's this. I put this on the screen up here. This is what I tell people when they ask me what the Peace Corps is. The Peace Corps is basically a federal agency of the it's an independent agency of the United States government that will send you outside the United States for a period of 2 years to work as a volunteer in a community that needs your talents and skills. That actually did not come from any website. It's not from any book or anything. That's how I explain it. I like to put it in those terms for a couple of reasons. First of all, we're talking about an independent agency. It's not attached to any other department. Funded on its own. It doesn't answer to anybody, but it does have special connections to the State Department. That's kind of important, especially to me. As I mentioned, I didn't type it in there actually now that I see that, but you would be volunteering in a community that needs your talents and skills. It's a volunteer agency. Guess what? If you want to get rich, this is the wrong seminar to come to. Okay? We can talk more about what it's like as far as the details of your actual being there, but I can guarantee you that when you walk away from the Peace Corps, you won't be much richer than when you started, except in other terms than money. At the bottom, though, this here does come off of the website. You can find this on the website now, even though Washington is a bit of a mess right now. Volunteers, as you can see there, use their energy, ingenuity, and skills to work towards reducing inequality and creating opportunities in communities around the world. Now, that's a rather glamorous description. I like to think that some intern somewhere in Washington wrote that. But it's not wrong. I'll give you that. If that's not enough of a detail as far as what the Peace Corps does, it might help you to look at what the mission statement is. Everybody likes to talk about mission statements. If you have an organization, you have to have a mission statement, right? Exactly. The people in the back are nodding their heads like this.
We cannot read what you wrote in your slides.
Hey, no complaints from you. She's not an American. I would be more than happy to read that for you, Sophia. I just want to say out loud, everywhere I go, people say, oh, you're in international educational leadership? Do you know Sophia? I'm like, oh. Sophia is famous. But she's also a complainer. No, I'm joking. Basically, if you can read it here, that's fine. The mission statements are important, and there are 3 goals there. The first 2 goals are very closely related. The idea is that you want to meet people and help them for the skills and, help them with you can read it there. Trained and skilled, right? That's why you're there. You'll have a job. You'll have something specific that you're there to do because you know how to do it. The best example I can give you that is teaching. If you're a teacher, they need a teacher there. That's why you're there. The second and the third, though, might be interesting to you because it is promoting the understanding of Americans to the people that are served. Part of it is a cultural exchange. The third goal is a reverse of that. When you come back, well, you're not required, but it would be really, really nice if you talk to people around you, the Americans that you know, and explain to them what it was like to be in Cameroon, or what it was like to be in Moldova, or what it was like to be in the Philippines. That's how the system and the organization really wants to work. And so it's not just about doing a job. It's not just about going there because you happen to know how to be a health volunteer, you know something about clinical management, or you know something about public health research or programs or anything like that. Part of it, again, is the culture exchange that's there. What do volunteers do then? Oh, well, this is where things get a little complicated. To be as specific as possible, I can't really tell you exactly. If you went into the Peace Corps, I would know exactly this much about what you would be doing. 0. I can no better predict what you would be doing than really anybody else in the room could. But I can tell you this. If we conveniently divide up all the jobs that are in the Peace Corps, and we put them into little categories with labels and cute little icons like that, basically it breaks down like this. You have your agricultural people. There's community economic development. And where you see that, I want you to think business. Education is there. Environment is there. Environment and agriculture tend to be very closely related. Health, you'll see there's there. And the last one then is youth and development. Now, I can't say for sure that whatever your background is, whatever your educational history is, or whatever it is that you do with your career in the United States will necessarily fit into one of those boxes. But if you think about what the Peace Corps is doing, I can show you that there are people who work in every one of these categories. At the same time, though, a healthy chunk of those people right now are teaching. Second place, of course, is health, as you can see there. If you're comfortable teaching, you might end up doing both. You never know. Where? Where, oh where? Sophia, you don't have to read the letters here, okay? That's not the point. What I wanted to point out to you is the obvious. Probably any volunteer that you meet, there's a really good chance that they were in Africa somewhere, at least once for some of us. You're talking almost half, and this again, this is as we're speaking right now. Half of the volunteers that are in the Peace Corps, roughly 46%, are somewhere in Africa. After that, Latin America comes in big. Moving down again, Eastern Europe. This tends to surprise some people sometimes. There are actually a lot of programs in Eastern Europe. You have an ex-volunteer here today, actually, who is an Eastern Europe volunteer. Moving on, you can see there's a lot of people in Asia. There are programs in Mongolia and China. Philippines is in there as well. Indonesia, I think, is still there. Where's Cecilia? And of course, Caribbean areas. And last but not least, of course, the Pacific Islands. So there is the opportunity to travel almost anywhere in the world that you might like. Antarctica is not an option. But as far as where most programs go. Now, who decides that? Who decides which countries get to work with the Peace Corps? Well, that's kind of an upper management question, but I can tell you that a country has to actually apply to be part of the Peace Corps. You don't just arbitrarily decide, congratulations, great, you've got a Peace Corps program. No, it doesn't work like that. The country has to come to the Peace Corps and say, hey, could you help us with this? And so, if you're worried that the Peace Corps is the last vestige of colonialism that was manifested through the 70s as a result of globalization, and well, never mind. The answer is no. And I can get in more detail about that, but you have to come to my office for it. Okay, sounds good. How do I become a Peace Corps volunteer? Well, first of all, there's really only two requirements. You have to be 18 years old, and you have to be a U.S. citizen. Now, I'll be honest with you. As far as I know, nobody of the age of 18 has ever been a Peace Corps volunteer that I know of. It's not impossible, but it's really, really difficult. And part of the reason for that now is really just because it's extremely competitive to get in. I would be really, really surprised if a person 18 years old, fresh out of high school in the States, had the kind of skills or talents that would land them a position in the Peace Corps. So generally speaking, you're talking about at least someone who has a bachelor's degree and has some sort of skill that they can share and is an American citizen. Now, if you're not an American citizen, you're here tonight and this sounds like fun. Hey, how do I become a Peace Corps volunteer? It is actually possible to not be a U.S. citizen and be a Peace Corps volunteer. How? You have to get married to an American. So, I'll just let you think about that. Other than that, as you can see at any given point, really there's about 7,200 volunteers around the world. That number changes from year to year. Programs start, programs finish. Numbers go up, numbers go down. Almost 250,000 Americans have been Peace Corps volunteers at some point in the past. Hey, look at that! Almost 2/3 are female. There's a surprise. And as you can see there, and this is one of the reasons why I doubt that anyone has actually ever been an 18-year-old volunteer, is that the age range that you can see there starts at 20. And that's probably what would not surprise me. It'd have to be that way. 90% of the people who finish it say you should do it. It's either a giant joke or they know something good about it. And again, the bulk of people who are Peace Corps volunteers have at least the undergraduate degree. Honestly, it's almost a requirement. And you can see stats there as far as married couples, 5%. People who are over 50, now you're talking 7%. Diversity, we're running around 10 to 22%. And again, as years go on, those numbers will change, go up or down. That's not really what's important. We talked about these 6 areas. If you're thinking about the Peace Corps at all, think about these 6 areas. Health is up there if you're here because you're in the public health program. There are other programs that are available. At the bottom, you see a nice little blue box with a bird in it. It says secondary projects. What's a secondary project? It's anything else that you feel that the community can get behind and you want to do. Now, there are things that have sometimes been suggested as secondary projects that don't go very well, but some of them actually go really well. What's an example? After-school English club. That's always a popular one. What else? Well, there are lots of options there. It depends on what you would like to do and what your community needs. If you go into your village as a Peace Corps volunteer and say, hey, I've got a great idea. Let's go around and tear all the tags off of those mattresses, people. What do you say? Probably they're not going to be behind that very much. But again, it depends on what your village wants and needs, what your community wants and needs, and what you can offer. I was asked one time to teach agriculture. And I had to say no because I don't know anything about agriculture. Oh my gosh. I would only know how to kill a plant if I had one. So, what's it like when you are a volunteer? What do you get as far as benefits and stuff? Well, first of all, you get a living stipend. You get basically an allowance every month. And it's a lot of money. It's hundreds and hundreds of dollars. No. Who am I kidding? It depends. The best way that I have to explain this is that you are paid at a level which is commensurate with the community that's around you. Now, there's a couple of things that don't go into that. Peace Corps these days will make sure that you have housing. They will arrange it, or they will actually pay your rent. So for example, while I was in the Philippines, the only housing that was really available was on the public market. And so I had my own apartment, woohoo! And I didn't have to pay the rent. Every month the Peace Corps sent me money for it, and I gave it to the landlord. So they will arrange your housing for you. They do pay you the stipend, which is basically enough for food and transportation. There are other things that are thrown in there. They're going to make sure that you have enough money for shampoo because nobody wants their volunteers walking around looking greasy and dirty. Other than that, though, you're not going to get rich in the Peace Corps. I promise you that. You are a volunteer. What else? Well, we did mention housing. This is the part everybody likes. Your medical and your dental are completely covered. If you get sick, Peace Corps takes care of you. If you get malaria, well, let's not say malaria. If you get a cold, the Peace Corps takes care of you. If you get the malaria and you're in the Peace Corps, you're in big trouble. Not just because you have malaria either. We'll talk about that another time. But your dental is all taken care of. You'll get dental checkups and dental work. While I was in training in the Philippines, before we were actually official volunteers, we had a woman who bit down on I think it was like bean soup or something like that. Caught a rock, snapped a tooth. Same day, they had a car, they ran and grabbed her, tore her away, took her into Manila to the biggest dental hospital they had there, and they fixed it. Something like within 24 hours. And of course, she was, in agony, of course, because a broken tooth is no joke. But that's kind of an example. If you run into any medical problem at all, Peace Corps is going to take care of it, within some limitations. And there are specifics to that we can get into if you really want to know. What else? Oh my gosh, what's this student loan deferment and cancellation stuff? Well, let's be clear. If I talk about student loan stuff, we could be here all night. The basic idea is if you have a federal loan or consolidate your loans into a federal loan and you become a Peace Corps volunteer, you have the opportunity to either defer or possibly cancel that. It depends on the loan. It depends on your lender. Now, if you have a private loan or if you have a private bank loan or something like that, I don't have a guarantee that you'll be able to defer it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and that's unfortunate. Vacation time. You get vacation time at the same rate as a federal employee. Sorry. I laugh because all of my bosses are completely gone. I have no idea where they are. They're probably sitting at home watching this on TV is what they're doing. Or they're sitting at home watching eating ice cream and watching soap operas. I like to tell people that. Career skills and training. This is one of the things that I kind of wanted to say out loud. Yes, I'm not a health volunteer. I can't give you specifics, but if you picked up one of those papers that says Teaching English as a Foreign Language, please, please, please hold on to that. This is one of the newer programs that they started even just within the last year. If you go into the Peace Corps and you work as an education volunteer in specific countries, there might be what they call the TEFL program there, and they give you a certification for TEFL. When you finish, you have a certificate and a qualification that says, I know how to teach English as a foreign language. Why is that a big deal? Because I used to be a principal. And I used to meet people all the time who had some kind of TEFL or TOEFL qualification. And they would tell me that, and they'd be very happy about it. And they'd say, I have a certificate. And I would say, okay. Because in my experience, and again, this is just speaking for me, TEFL qualification programs like this vary a lot. There are people who have certificates that studied the business for an entire semester or even have it as a minor. But there are people who go to a one-day seminar and they walk out with a certificate. So me, as an employer in Japan looking for people who knew how to teach English as a foreign language, if they came up to me and they said they had a certificate, it didn't mean a lot to me. If they had come up to me with one of these certificates, it would have been a big deal because it's got the federal government's stamp on it. Now, of course, that right now is not worth much. But I think you see my point here. Anyway, that's some of the career skills and training. Other things include language and culture training. Months and months and months before you ever get to the site where you will be living for years, you will receive training on a daily basis on language and culture. You will be so tired of language training, it will hurt your head. But it's all good. Safety and health. This is kind of one of the big things. This is what I get the most questions about. Is it safe? People want to know, is it safe? Am I going to be safe there? This is the way I answer this. And this is an extremely serious topic. As I mentioned, there are medical people who are there 24/7. On top of that, there are security officers, specific people who only work with security in the country where you work. Their job is to make sure they're watching all the events that are in your country and making sure that things are safe for you as a volunteer. On top of that, Peace Corps goes to great lengths to make sure that you are actually supposed to be in an area that is safe, and if there's something that's going wrong or something that they're not comfortable with, or even if just it's a cloudy day, they will yank you out of there so fast it will make your head spin. Now, case in point, I used to live in the Philippines. If you're familiar with that area, it's on what they call the Ring of Fire, which sounds very exciting. As a sort of a short explanation, the Philippines does sit in an area where they get volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, natural disasters almost on a monthly basis. The way that basically works is regularly, sometimes on a daily basis, I would get text messages on the cell phone from the Peace Corps office that said, if you're a volunteer in this area, you must go here immediately, because probably there was a typhoon somewhere in the area. Peace Corps doesn't play around like that. If they think something's going to go wrong, you are the first person out of the area for a couple of reasons. First of all, they are responsible for your security. But number two, if things go pear-shaped and you're there as a volunteer, you are in the way. So they want you out of the way. So not only is it about you being safe, but they also want to make sure that you're not an additional burden to whatever's going on there. If there's a typhoon and you're sitting around because your house is flat and you're a volunteer, that makes them look a little silly. It also means there's one more person in that area who needs help. They might as well take you out early so that everybody else gets the help that they really need. Community immersion training, and this is kind of where I shift my discussion. Up until this point, I wanted you to understand that the Peace Corps is going to do everything that it possibly can to make sure that you are safe. You can't even go to some areas in the country. I was on my island. My island was kind of a long, thin island. Nobody was allowed to come to my island south of where I was. So again, Peace Corps makes a point of making sure that you're safe. And if you're one of those people who's traveled a lot and you're comfortable being out there in the world on your own, it's almost annoying because they constantly watch over you. It's like having another mother. But that's a good thing. The other part of that, though, is this. And I'll say it this way so that it kind of makes sense so that it's clear to you. I never felt unsafe when I was in the Peace Corps unless I was outside my home village and I was being stupid, if that makes sense to you. Wink, wink, I was being stupid. The fact of the matter is when you go to your village and you get there, all the people know who you are. Oh, they know who you are. You stand out like a sore thumb. They know who you are, they know why you're there, and they want you there. Your community knows who you are and they support you. They want you to be there. They asked for you to be there. They applied for someone like you to be there. While you're there, I can guarantee, I will swear it on a stack of Bibles, that is the safest place you are in the whole country because you have dozens upon dozens of other people watching you, sometimes every minute of the day. And if it's not an adult, it's a little kid who has instructions to go and tell mom if something happens to him. The point I want to make here is this. Peace Corps is going to do everything that it can to make sure that you're safe. At the same time, though, you have to make sure that you're trying to be safe as well. Unfortunately, like I said, I did have bad experiences in the Peace Corps, but I can tell you with all honesty, none of those bad things ever happened in a village where I was living. They always happened when I was somewhere else and I was misbehaving to start with. And I'm more than willing to admit to that. I'm not going to tell you the stories because they're embarrassing. But it's true. On top of that, you do, of course, have support from the U.S. government. That's why you're there. And if you do run into a problem, they do have dedicated people who are on staff to work for advocacy. Now, this is the fun part. This is the list that I really like. This is the stuff that I really want people to think about, because if they're thinking about the Peace Corps at all, you should be thinking about what you're going to do after the Peace Corps. This is the difficult part for young people sometimes, thinking into the future that far ahead. I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow, so I can't really complain. When you get back, roughly speaking, you'll get a magical $8,000! Oh my gosh! So you can buy an old car with that. That's not really the allure. Nobody that joins the Peace Corps is in it for the $8,000. What you should be in it for are things like graduate school benefits, if you've ever thought about graduate school, oh my gosh, come into my office. I have a list that's longer than my arm of graduate school programs. In fact, if you want, go look at the website now. Some of them are absolutely astonishing. I told this to another class, I think it was yesterday. If you are a Peace Corps volunteer and you finish your 2 years and you keep your nose mostly clean, University of Arizona, if you want a master's degree or a PhD, it doesn't even matter what topic it is. If you're a Peace Corps volunteer down there and you go down there, they'll admit you and they will pay your tuition completely, and they'll pay you like $6,000 a semester to go to school down there. That's just nuts. Why am I here? I didn't know about this 6 months ago, that's why. If I'd have known about that, I'd be giving this speech down in the desert somewhere. I'd be much happier. I'm not a snow person. 3 years in the jungle, and this weather's making me crazy. What else? Professional networking and career services. That's me, but it's also other people. There is a network of people who will help you find a job if you want one. What else? Federal employment advantages. If you're a Peace Corps volunteer, within the first year, I love telling people this because it makes them just salivate. First year after you get out of the Peace Corps, you get something that's called non-competitive eligibility. It is exactly what it sounds like. Basically speaking, and I realize that there are specifics to this. This is the streamlined explanation. If you apply for a federal job and someone with the exact same qualifications as you applies for the same job, you get the job, no questions asked. And in some cases, they don't even have an interview. Who was it, Sharon or Pat that did that? Somebody in the local area walked into the Forest Service office after the Peace Corps and said, "Hey, got any jobs?" And they said, "Yeah." And they said, "Great, I'm a Peace Corps volunteer." And they said, "You start tomorrow morning." It's a great story, particularly if you're thinking about anything like foreign service, if you're thinking about the State Department, if you're thinking about forestry, Agriculture Department, if you just want to work for the Peace Corps, anything like that. Now, I tell you all this, and I realize this is a rotten time to be making a pitch for working for the government. But hey, in principle, it's wonderful, right? Sure, Kevin, tell me again about how great it is to work for the federal government. I don't know. A question, yes?
Yeah, I was wondering, so you're talking about benefits after serving.
Yes.
Wondering what people do or what the process is for reincorporating people back into society to sort of mitigate reverse culture shock and trying to ease that transition in conjunction with.
You're on your own. No, I'm not. That's a joke. I'm sorry. Yeah. And I think, speaking from experience, a year ago, I was going through that process, and I think it's safe to say probably the last 2 or 3 months that you're actually in the country are all programs to get you reacclimated to go back. Because, I mean, you look at me, and I probably look like a reasonably normal person, but there are folks who really, really get integrated into the communities and into the country and into the culture, and for them it's very, very difficult to snap back. And so there is, I mean, the entire last part of probably the last quarter of the time that you're spending there is making sure that you're thinking about going back. What are you going to do when you get there? What's it going to be like? Who do you need to talk to? On top of that, they do have counseling that's available for people who don't do well, but that's an extremely rare case for what I've heard. And so, but if you want more details about that, come and talk to me about that, because it does come up. And I know some people now who are ex-volunteers, and they're not adjusting as well as I would have expected, but everybody's different, and so it might be that that's just a once-off. Another question?
Yeah, just personally, do you think that it's easier for you because you remain slightly removed from, because you said there are some people that get entirely integrated into your village. Do you feel as though you intentionally left sort of a space?
Not necessarily. I think that's more a function of the culture. Filipino culture is already completely destroyed by what Americans brought there. That's just me making another joke. But it's going to depend on the person. It's going to depend on what they do. It's going to depend where they are geographically, even, because people who are far, far out in I've met some of those folks, and it's something to behold, I guess, is the best and nicest way to say. Yes.
I think from my experience and from friends, one of the most difficult things in re-entering the country is almost a sense of guilt that we have so much here that people over there didn't. And so you walk into a store and all of a sudden you've got 20 different varieties of olive oil. And you're thinking, what's going on here? So
That is,
you will have it, you will experience it, but you're better for it in the end, too.
Okay.
Also, I went to Republic of Georgia and South Africa, and throughout those periods, you frequently will meet with your companions, the others that are in your group, and you usually form a real strong bond with the people that are in your, what we call your
Cohort. Your group.
cohorts.
Yeah. That's.
And also they pull you in at least every couple months for training.
Yeah.
Or they want to indoctrinate you or teach you, or you work on certain problems. So you're meeting with the people who are representing the Peace Corps, your director, and all the other people, and also your friends.
Yeah. It's not like you're completely ostracized from American culture.
No.
You'll meet people and you'll know people who are also volunteers, and if you feel the need to sort of touch base, that opportunity is definitely there. On the other hand, I have known people who never looked at another American for 2 years if they could have helped it, and I was one of those people. And so it's, hey, I didn't go to the Philippines to meet other Americans, okay? But then, it depends on the person, it depends on the situation very much. I don't know that I can speak specifically to, somebody who had a traumatic experience on coming back into the country. Go ahead, Todd.
Well, I was in Uzbekistan, which is in Central Asia, by the way. And we were evacuated early because of things going on there. And it was kind of like they just picked us up and moved us back into the country. And one of the things I remember most, we had to go to, I think it was the Forest Service training camp or something in West Virginia when we got back. And we walked in to the cafeteria. It was a cafeteria style. And all of us, our mouths just went like that because of all the food.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. It is. It's the transition back is going to be a challenge no matter what you do or where you are. How you deal with that depends a lot on you, but there are other factors involved. Where it's possible, of course, Peace Corps is going to prepare you for it, and they're going to support you through it. And so I think that's the quickest, easiest answer. Okay. Sir?
So I'm curious about your security details. Who employs them? And earlier you made a joke about the Peace Corps and colonialism.
I did. Yeah. Go ahead.
So are these people Peace Corps volunteers? Are they CIA agents?
There's that magic word. Absolutely, yeah. To go back to the first part of your question, in my experience, the Peace Corps security officers who I have met were host country nationals who had specific experience either with a law enforcement bureau or an investigative bureau within the country. As an example, our Peace Corps security officer in the Philippines was ex-NBI, which is the equivalent of the Filipino equivalent of the FBI. And to be honest, he looked more like Santa Claus than an FBI agent. But at the same time, he was good, and he knew exactly what was safe and what wasn't. And as far as any of us were concerned as volunteers, or the staff really in the country, what he said was law. If he said, don't go there, you stay out of the Capitol on this day because of this event, there was no question asked. Mostly because we all knew as volunteers that if we did go into the Capitol, we were getting on a plane the next day and going back to America. I mean, it was game over. At the same time, though, he was in constant communication with the embassy. So the U.S. Embassy has its own security specialists who are also have very close, and they pay close attention to what's going on in the country. And again, for me, the Philippines is an excellent example of that. If you're familiar with the Philippines at all, the lower third, basically, of the entire archipelago is no-go. Nobody goes there. Any American, you can't go there. You're not supposed to anyway. And there are good reasons for that. The biggest one would be basically that Abu Sayyaf is present in the southernmost parts of those areas and was making forays up into the main island of Mindanao. And so not only was the embassy paying close attention to things like that, but the staff in country was in communication with them constantly to make sure that the volunteers were nowhere near that. There were some incidents while I was in the Philippines where there was some sort of an altercation or fighting broke out on an island where there was a volunteer, and that's a very general statement. on an island where there was a volunteer. And again, Mother Hen Peace Corps plucked them out immediately and sent them somewhere safe. Now, you said the magic letters there. As far as the CIA goes, do you have a question back there? Okay, just checking. I can only touch on that a little bit, and I'll say this up front. If you're one of those people who's thinking about possibly a career in Forest Service, possibly a career in the CIA, possibly a career in the Peace Corps, my advice to you would be very simply this. No matter what your goals are as far as how your career, your life goes, if you're going to do some of these things, do the Peace Corps first. And the reason for that is very simple. If you have any military intelligence background, if you've worked for the I can't even say it now, CIA, or you were in the military and you did military intelligence, or you worked for something like the OSI, sorry, it's not going to happen ever. And the reason for that is historical. There were cases in the past where there were people who were volunteers, and I don't know that this is necessarily documented anywhere. I'm sure it's not any kind of urban myth, but for a long time, and I think it was during the late 60s, early 70s, some of the volunteers were actually in the CIA, and I hope it's nobody that's in this room. I will be very disappointed. Oh, furloughed. Thank you. That's good news. Yeah.
They said they were Peace Corps.
Yes.
But they weren't.
And that might be the distinction. There was an issue with that. I also know that Peace Corps has been in countries where the host country government was really uncomfortable with the fact that there were Americans in the country at all and kicked them out. And just blanket said, no more. We don't want any more of this. We don't know who you are. We don't know why you're here. And we don't know that we can trust you. And it's because, again, because there's that sort of shadow in the past of the fact that there were people who either were masquerading as Peace Corps volunteers or were actually agents and they were pretending to be Peace Corps volunteers. Does that answer your question, sir? Yeah. That's the kind of an uncomfortable question that I do get a lot because it's there and it's in history. And I don't know that I have a better answer for that because, again, it's not one of the things that happens so much now. At least I hope most of the people that come into my office are not CIA agents. I wouldn't know, though, of course, because if I asked you, you would say no.
Well,
Yes, sir.
They would come to you with their agents.
I hope not.
They would come to you with their officers.
I hope so.
Between a CIA officer and a CIA agent.
I'm hoping so, yeah. Thank you, sir.
And they do a background check.
Yes, and that's part of it, too. They do a complete background check on you. It's part of the process. It takes a long time. But, yeah. If it's okay, shall we continue? Great. Yeah. A couple other things that are up there. Please take a note of public service loan forgiveness. This is the one thing that I do like to mention to young people because everybody's carrying around this huge bag of guilt in the back of their mind about all that money that you borrowed. Peace Corps is not a magic bullet. They're not going to erase your debt for you, but it is important to remember that basically if you join and you complete your service and basically if you make payments for 10 years faithfully without defaulting or missing a payment, they will erase everything that's left. And if you're in the health field, that's huge. Okay? Let me move through some of these because I can see that the time is clicking on. Graduate school programs, if you notice at the beginning, after my name, it says BSN MedL. MedL is Master's in Education Leadership. BSN is a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. I actually have a nursing degree as well. It's crazy. And it came about because when I came out of the Peace Corps, the first time I joined a fellows program and went to school to become a nurse. And the Peace Corps paid 2/3 of my tuition. So again, when you get out of these programs, think about what you want to do after the Peace Corps and be thinking about the programs that are available, at least at the time. There's a lot you can do with this. It's okay, I'm going to skip ahead again. I don't expect you to read the little tiny letters here. All I wanted to point out was that basically there's about 8 steps to this process. Part of it is basically making the application and the submissions, all of that. You'll need to write an essay, you'll need to give a resume, you'll have to have a health history done, a brief overview. You send it in, they decide if they want to interview you. If you get to the interview and it goes well, they'll call you and say, congratulations, you're going to Guatemala or someplace similar. And that's when the fun starts because that's when you have to start putting together all your security paperwork, all your medical, all your dental stuff. And truth be told, this can take as much as 6-9 months or even a year. And for the folks who are like me and who did this a long time ago, we all remember getting that big fat envelope in the mail filled with papers and Peace Corps said send it back in a month. And that was the first hurdle of being a Peace Corps volunteer. If you're interested in this and you want to talk about details, and you're always welcome to come back and see me sometime. If you're thinking about jobs that are out there, you want to see some details as far as what you might be doing and where, I always recommend that people go to the website and look. The joke, of course, is with the current state of affairs in Washington that the website isn't being updated as quickly as I would like. They are still accepting applications, but the information and the jobs that you see there might not be the most current that are available. Come and talk to me if you have questions about it, though. So, is there another question? I'm sorry. As far as what health volunteers do, this is why we're technically here today. All this introduction and testimonials and is fine, but actually if you're considering this at all, if it looks the least bit interesting to you, you're probably thinking that you might want to do something in the health field. So this is the part where I kind of get into the deep water, and I can't tell you specifically what it's like to be a health volunteer. There are people here who can. And if you have specific questions, you really want to know, you want to talk to somebody who's done this specifically in the health field, I would point you to the two ladies who are here tonight. Now, in a general sense, I can tell you this though. As far as the health area is concerned, the focus is on a few things. First of all, promotion of access to clean water, promotion of maternal and child health, promotion of nutrition, and promotion of preventive health. How does this determine? Of course, the host country decides what they want you to be doing. So they might have a clean water project. They need health volunteers that can help out with that. That might be what you're doing. It might be that they have sort of a, what's a good way to say it, maternity care sort of education programs that they need help with. You might have been doing something like that. Now, you'll notice that I said promotion of every time. That's kind of important. 1 second here. You can reach around. As far as the responsibilities would go, it's again encouraging healthy behaviors, raising awareness on these things. The list that's up there is serious stuff. HIV, AIDS, malaria is up there, maternal and child services, nutrition, hygiene, education. All these things might be something that you're working with. Again, in terms of encouraging healthy behaviors and awareness of. So what you're probably thinking at this point is, hey, most of this stuff looks like promoting health care, health awareness, health education. What about medical care provision? And the fact is, health volunteers in the Peace Corps are not usually healthcare providers. It might be that, and I put a little star there. I want you to see the star because it's kind of important. It's not that you can't be a volunteer if you're a doctor or a nurse. It's just that if you are a doctor or a nurse and you join the Peace Corps, I'm betting 99% of the time you'll actually be working in something like health education, or you'll be working in some sort of community health project. I can't say for sure that's specific and that it's for sure. But the fact is, there was a program that had specific appeal to medical professionals, and it only went to 2 countries. I think it was Uganda and 1 other. This ended a while back. And in that case, they were looking specifically for people who had health care licenses and degrees. But again, if you're, yes ma'am?
I was in that program.
Were you in that program? Excellent. Yeah.
3 countries.
Was it Uganda and?
The focus was to teach medicine or teach nursing.
Ah, excellent. Thank you.
So they employ nurses and doctors
Right.
to go.
Super. Okay, that clears that up for me.
Not to provide direct care.
But this ended like, yeah, as far as I know, there was never a direct care unless you kind of did it and you weren't supposed to.
I was in a long time ago.
Yes.
I was an occupational therapist.
Right.
As a real occupational therapist on a psychiatric hospital in Belize.
Excellent. So how long ago was this, may I ask? Yeah, because I don't think they do it anymore. As far as I've considered, everything I said that you will not be providing at all. And so we'll have to talk about that at some point because I need to pick your brain about some of those things. In general, all the literature, go ahead.
The issue is liability.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So liability, if you're providing direct care, as
Right.
in the United States, if you're operating without a license, if
Right.
you're in South Africa and you don't have a South African nursing license,
Right.
and you give injections and something goes wrong, then
Absolutely, yeah. And that's kind of the next thing that I was going to say. If this sounds like your talents are being wasted, it's not an issue of what you know or what you can do. It's actually an issue of licensure. And so, if it's okay, any other? Cool. So, give me some ideas about sample projects and programs. Sure. Unfortunately, this is kind of the boring part of the show, so I'm going to move through these slides as fast as I can. Health extension is one. Thinking about training on nutrition, sanitation, oral rehydration, working with local leaders. You can kind of read through this a little bit. The one that I wanted to point out here was peer educators for HIV, AIDS, and similar youth education programs. Mostly because I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. Also, public health education. This is probably what most of the young people here who are interested in this might be thinking about. If you're interested at all in health education or outreach programs with clinics, community needs assessments, health education, epidemiological studies, it's always possible that you might be doing some sort of research project within a host country. Water and sanitation, this might be a little more obscure. It depends on the country, of course. Promoting awareness of water sanitation, tap springs, constructing wells, building latrines. What'd you do in the Peace Corps? I built latrines. Improving potable water sources, of course. And, of course, the last one here is environmental and water engineering. This actually sounds really cool to me. Concrete spillways, earthen dams. How cool would that be? Oh, my gosh. So anyway, with that, if it's all right, I'm going to talk just very briefly about some of my own experiences that had something tangentially to do with the health sort of the health area there. Now again, most of my experiences, 99% of my experiences were in the education arena, so I might be the least qualified volunteer here to talk about these things, but I'm willing to share, and you guys paid a lot of money to see me talk. Well, if you did pay money, you got ripped off. So, the picture that you see here, actually, you guys remember Jared. This is Jared working in an agricultural project, actually, in Madagascar. Ah, that's me when I had hair. Whee! Life was so good. When I was in Lesotho, and this was early in 1988, or excuse me, 1998, 88 was when Pat and Sharon were there, I did HIV/AIDS education as well as sex education with junior high school students. Now, I say junior high school student, you're all thinking 10, 12 years old. No, 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 no. My students were as old as 23, and they were in grade 7. It's just a sort of a complication of the education system there at the time. And basically what I did, my job basically was, my headmistress came to me one day and said, you know, sex education is on the syllabus for science class. And I taught science classes, and I was kind of tiptoeing around it, to be honest, not because I was embarrassed, but because I knew there was kind of a cultural taboo there. In that particular culture in Africa at that time, people didn't really talk about sex. It was not something that people talked about openly, at least. And so it didn't surprise me when the headmistress came to me and said, could you take care of that part? Because none of us really want to talk about it. And I said, sure. I accepted it as a challenge. And actually it turned out really, really well. By that point, well, I was a volunteer there. And again, I was teaching junior high school with students who were at least 23 sometimes. By that point, I had a really good relationship with the students, and so I was comfortable talking about these things. But at the same time, they had so many questions, and nobody would talk to them about these things. And so it was a really good experience for me, and it was an excellent experience for them. Now, when I talk about teaching in a class, I want to make sure that we're very clear on a couple of things. This is on the side of a mountain at a school where there was no school. Basically, I was attached to a church which had an education program, and they were looking for somebody who could help them build it up to the point where they could afford things that are cool, like buildings. I was teaching in a storage room at the church, which was way, way smaller than this room, and I had 75 kids crammed into a classroom. Basically, they had to provide everything. They had to bring their own pencils and paper, of course, but they also had to provide their own uniforms. They had to bring their own chairs from home. And you get 75 people in a room like that. I don't really care how old or how young they are, and they're all writing like this. You can see where my hands are. They're like, look, and try and give a test like that. I mean, you can imagine. Your neighbor's paper is basically right there next to your wrist. So I had a whole other problem. But when we got to this point, it was a good thing. I actually coordinated with the local NGO that all they did was basically sex education. I had to go into the camp. We had to arrange it with that guy. He was fantastic. One of the nicest and most amazing people that I ever met in Africa was this guy who worked in the NGO, and basically his whole job, day in and day out, was to go and talk to communities about proper sexual behavior. But he didn't do it for free. We had to come up with a little bit of funding to support his transport out there. We got that all settled basically through small-scale grants and things like that. But at the same time, it was an amazing experience for the kids because not only could they ask me questions, but they could also ask this guy who was really friendly and very knowledgeable, and they were comfortable doing it in their own language. So you can imagine how my students felt as they were trying to ask me in English about things that, you know, basically were related to sex. And my best story about that, and the one story that I really like to tell, and I'm glad that we had enough time for it today, was this. I'm in a class with 75 kids. Just by virtue of, I don't know, luck or maybe the culture or the way things worked. Every class that I ever taught there, all the boys sat at the back, and I say boys, that's being very general. Most of them were men. And all the ladies sat at the front. And we opened the discussion up, and I said, you can ask me anything that you want. I really don't mind. If you have questions, if you're confused about something, feel free. So at the back of the class one day, there's like this elbow going like this, like, go ahead, ask him, ask him. That's the way things worked, of course. Since junior high school, you kind of expect that behavior. Finally, this one little kid, looks like he's under a lot of stress from his peers. He actually asked this question that everybody wants to know, but they somehow elected him to ask it. He says, "Sir, what about the teeth?" I was like, "Did you say teeth?" He says, "Yes, sir." And I said, "What teeth?" He said, "Inside the woman, there are teeth." And I said, "Really?" And all the boys in the back were like, "Yes!" And all the girls in the front are like, "No! No!" Now, in this situation, it's natural to pretty much trust the girls in the class to say, they say there's no teeth. But he was trying really hard, and he was embarrassed. I was trying to be supportive and say, I don't really understand why you think there are teeth inside the woman, but I will try to find out for you. And this was my personal quest, basically, for this strange holy grail. For like 2 months after that, I went and I asked everybody, anybody I could think. I asked married couples who obviously had more experience with sex than I ever did. And I said, look, my students are asking about teeth. And they laughed and said, oh, really? Teeth inside the woman? And I said, I don't know what to say to this kid. You know, and I would see him every day, and I didn't have an answer for him. And I said, I'm still trying to figure it out. And finally, and this was months later, I had actually left my village to go into the main town that was close to me. I say main town, but it's like one gas station and it's 4 stores. And I went in and I saw the same guy, basically, that I worked with on this NGO project, basically the sex education project. And I said to him, I have a question I cannot find the answer to, and I don't understand. And he said, what is it? And I said, my student wants to know about the teeth inside the woman. And he laughed just like to beat the band. He was laughing so hard. His tears were coming out of his... And he's laughing partly at me, but I can tell there's something else that I'm... And I had to sit there and wait for him to stop laughing before he could answer. And he said, this happens all the time. He said, in the vernacular, in the local language, when you get an STD, when you get a sexually transmitted disease, people say you were bit by the woman. The boys in your class have heard this from other men, older men, and they think that there are teeth inside them. All of a sudden, all the lights went on in my head, like, oh, it makes perfect sense. Of course, that's why he thinks there's teeth in her. I was so happy. I dashed back to that village, and I went to that kid's house, and I dragged him out, and I said, I have an answer for your question, and I explained it to him. And he looked disappointed, but he looked a little embarrassed, too, actually, that I had answered his question pretty much in the middle of the day in front of everybody. But it was very, very satisfying. But then again, that's to me is the perfect example, the kind of experience that I was having whenever I had to do something that was health related in a country. I used to, and this was with the sort of unwritten, unspoken permission of the school, I used to get condoms basically from the state-run supplier and bring them to the village. And then I would say to my students or the young people that were in the village, if you need one of those things, stop by my house and I'll give them to you. And I made it clear, we had the whole condom education in class. We explained all these things, and my headmistress was completely relieved because she really didn't want to teach that part. And I made it clear that they could come and get them anytime. And so it was another kind of a thing that I did just to sort of support the village at that point. The idea was that you could come and you could get these things anytime you wanted, which was always right after dark. And always, it was like the oldest boy in class, and he was always dressed all in black, and he'd come and knock on the door, and like, sir, can you give me some of the things? And I was like, oh, right. And I'd go and I'd give him like a fistful of them, and he would distribute them to all of his friends. So again, that's the kind of thing that I was dealing with the Health Corps. The Health Corps, that's the new part of the Peace Corps, is the Health Corps. But I hope that gives you some kind of a small idea of what's going on there. I did have a video as far as other people. This young lady was actually working in a maternity education project. If I remember right, it's in Mali. The time is getting a little short, and I don't know that the video will actually work, and so if it's okay, I'll skip it. If you really want to know it or you really want to see about it, it's only 2 minutes long. It's on YouTube, and I'll actually send you the link if you will email me. And so if you're interested in that, it's actually really cool. I did know another volunteer who was in Mali who did work healthcare. And in her situation, she actually worked for a clinic, but there wasn't enough work for her, and so she began to visit on a regular basis the maternity clinic around there. And her job on a daily basis, get this, her job on a daily basis was to weigh the newborn babies. How awesome is that? I mean, how are you going to tell people when you come back to the States and you're trying to get a job at, I don't know, Kmart or something? You're like, what did you do before this? I used to weigh the babies at a maternity clinic in Africa. And be like, oh my gosh, that's the coolest thing ever. All right, this is your big chance. Yes, sir, please.
Back to your malaria. You said you're going to talk about the malaria.
Oh, the malaria thing? Yeah, there's, the long and short of that is basically this. When you're a Peace Corps volunteer, there's basically 4 things that you are never, ever, under any circumstances, allowed to do. And one of them is to refuse or fail to take your malaria medication. And so if you get malaria, then obviously you broke the rule. And it's serious stuff, though. Malaria is bad. People don't realize how bad malaria is until they actually have to, get into an area where it's at. When I went to the Philippines, actually only one small part of the Philippines is endemic as far as malaria goes. The rest of the country is more or less safe, but we had it drilled into our heads that under no circumstances would you ever, ever, ever get malaria because you were going to take your medicine every day. In which case, for me, it was doxycycline. But the doxycycline stops the one particular cycle in the parasite's reproductive process. And so if you take doxycycline regularly, it actually stops the parasite at that point. So if you do contract it, it should prevent it from actually developing. If I understand the medicine correctly. Is that good, sir? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
You said that the Peace Corps is connected to the State Department. Has it ever been used as guardianship for international relations and other, political?
That is like the most amazing question I've ever had in this job. Thank you for that one. I don't know that anybody's ever held the Peace Corps out as some sort of a bargaining chip. As I understand it, and again, this is sort of the upper level echelon sort of management things. Again, the country has to apply for the Peace Corps. I don't think there are ever any strings attached to that because, well, it would disappoint me if there were. If it was ever sort of like, okay, if you do this, we'll give you the Peace Corps.
Yeah, would it surprise you if it was used that way?
Yes. Mostly because I think most people see this as sort of a benevolent organization. And it would disappoint me greatly if somebody like the State Department said, oh, if you don't do this, we're going to yank all those volunteers. And I don't know has anybody ever heard of that? And so it would disappoint me greatly if it was. I would probably throw down my pen in anger.
The State Department doing things like that?
I'm sure they do that with other things, but I hope they don't do it with the Peace Corps. I'm sure if they did do it, they probably wouldn't tell people about it. Yeah. So, question?
So my question would be, you re-upped as a volunteer twice.
I did.
Why? What was it that you got out of the Peace Corps that made you think about it?
Gosh, my personal issues. Here I am. Repeating my dirty laundry on tape, too, no less. Basically, I can give you the cycle that I went through. And it may be that you are in one of the points on this cycle. And even some of you who are ex-volunteers might even feel similarly to this. To step back into my personal history a little bit, I was a military brat, and so I moved on a regular basis. I moved every couple of years. And when I graduated high school, I also joined the military, which is the part that you heard about at the beginning of this. That kind of set me up for a regular change in venue on a regular basis. The longest I had ever lived in one particular place until probably about 2012 was 2 years. And so this was kind of I did all the things that I did right. I went into the military, I got the GI Bill, I got out, I went to college, I got my degree, I got a job in an office somewhere, and about 6 months later I said, this is the most boring thing I have ever done in my whole life. I cannot imagine sitting here for 35 years waiting for that gold watch, and it was just horrifying to think that people could do that for that long and not even think about, some sort of change. At the same time, I don't want to be the person who has to tell you this, but America is dead boring. Oh my gosh, this place is so dull. Are you kidding me? There is a whole world out there that is so much more interesting than I know some people love this place. Missoula? Oh my gosh. Don't get me started on Missoula. Point of this is basically I was at that point in my life where I said, okay, I did everything right, and this is probably the most horrific future that I can think of for myself get me out of here. And then this was at the time when you had to actually go down to the local university and talk to the person like me. And I talked to her, and she said, why do you want to be a Peace Corps volunteer? And I had heard about it all my life. That's the only reason I knew about the Peace Corps at all. But I said, I'm really, really bored here. America is the most boring thing I've been through in a long time. And so she signed me up, and in those days you didn't know where you were going until you got the phone call. And they said, congratulations, you're going to Lesotho. And I said, wow, where's that? And it was a fantastic experience. I love teaching. I love being a teacher, and being a teacher under the most austere, rustic situations is absolutely liberating. It's also extremely challenging. I told this to another class actually the other day. I used to teach science. I told you that actually, I think in this too. I would love for everybody to get the chance to teach science in a school that has no electricity, no running water, no science lab whatsoever, and see how creative you become. I used to dig through people's garbages looking for stuff that I could use in class. Anything, anything. Old clothespins were like gold. I once almost had like this total, I almost fainted because I found a piece of a radio. I found a busted speaker off of somebody's radio that probably broke off on the back of their car as they were speeding past our village somewhere. And I almost shrieked like a little girl because I thought, this is the most amazing thing ever. Why? Well, because if you know anything about science, or if you're a science teacher at all, that speaker has not only copper wire in it, but it has a fully functional magnet in it, and all you got to do is hook it up to something else. And you've got 9 out of every 10 physics experiments that are in a junior high school science book. Little things like that. And so when I finished that, and I went back to America and I saw the aisles of cereal there, it was a bit of a wake-up call, but I also felt like I hadn't really finished there. And so I ended up going back to South Africa to work basically professional development for teachers. And I've got pictures of that I can show you if we can move past the complaints section. And again, this is all specific to education. I hope we have enough time. It's like 5 minutes left, right? Yeah, okay, cool. This is me when I was a little bit younger. It's hard to see a little bit, but this was like one of the proudest things I ever did. There was no school building when I got there. I tried to explain that to you earlier. I had to actually do all the footwork. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this sort of situation. I walked from NGO to NGO through the capital of Lesotho on my, basically on my own free time, trying to find somebody, anybody, who would fund a high school. At the time, it was very popular to build primary schools in Lesotho, mostly because the more schools that you have, the more likely people have access to education, and the better the community can develop. There's a whole bunch of educational theories involved in that. But at the time, it was extremely rare to find somebody who would fund a junior high school or a high school. I finally found one terribly nice European man who worked with something called the MMU, which at the time was sort of part of it was a benevolent arm of what was before the EU. But they were operating in Lesotho, and I talked to the guy, and I said, you got to help me build a school. And he took pity upon me, and we went through the whole grant process. I learned the hard way how to write a grant application, send it in, and they actually gave us the money for it. They paid for half of it with the understanding that the other half would be provided by the community, the actual physical labor and the transportation. And so they paid materials. All of my, basically, community members, the people that lived around me, went out there on a daily basis, and they built it up. And as you can see, this was right before I left. We actually had walls, we had windows, we had a roof. I was so psyched. Oh, my gosh. I could have won the lottery. I wouldn't have even noticed at that point because I was too excited about this school. So all of this leads back to your original question. You do this once, and you think, wow, that was really great. This is amazing. And then you come back here and you say, oh, this is like, there's nothing here that's, this is so dull. I got to do something that has a little more magic to it. And then you jump in and you go back and you do it again. That's my home in Lesotho. That's what my house looked like. This is mine right here, actually. My house was, it was just bigger. I could stand dead center in my house, put my arms out like this, and my fingertips would just graze the walls. It was that big. And I was by myself in that. The roof is thatch. It's basically dried grass reeds. Some of you might have had similar houses where you were. It was great when it was raining because the rain would drip through. And it was great. It was also a grand nesting place for almost every insect that lived in the whole village. There were bugs there that I don't even have names for. The wall, I guess, as you can see there, is a mixture of mud and dried cow dung. And I know a lot of you go, oh, God, that's disgusting. No, really, this is great stuff. Look, you take cow dung. You try this at home if you want to. If you got access to cows, you got an amazing building experience in your future, trust me. You take that cow, he's laughing because he knows this is the truth. You take that cow dung, you take it and you take it out and you throw it into the yawn, not now, you'd have to do it in the summertime. It'll dry out until you get basically a Frisbee. Yeah, it's like a giant dried out pancake. And then you basically smash it up and you mix it with wet mud. Now, the thing is, when you get that stuff, that stuff wet again, you mix it with mud, and you have a fantastic adhesive property to that. You can smear that on there. And the beauty of the whole thing is, it's mostly, I can't say waterproof. It does absorb water, but that's where the water stops. But the best part of that, it doesn't smell at all. I don't know how many of you have had that experience, but my host family used to come in basically once a month, and they would take all the stuff out of my house, and I'd come home from school and they'd go, oh no, not this again. And they'd take all the stuff out and they would go back through and they would smear fresh mixture of mud and cow dung. Fantastic. Didn't smell at all. It was like, I mean, it was better than having like linoleum, because if you spilled something on it, it was gone. It's great. I loved it. I'm trying to do it at my house, but my landlord won't let me. The patterns you see on the door are related to the clans. I was in the, I don't know about you guys, I was part of the rabbit clan. This is me in South Africa. I still had hair. This is my host family here. In this situation, I had a much different house. This was actually a concrete building, stacked blocks with a tin roof, which was absolutely horrid because I lived on the edge of the Kalahari Desert. So if it wasn't 114 degrees outside, it was raining like crazy. Both of those situations are awful if you have a tin roof. First of all, because if it's raining, you can't hear anything. If you've ever taught in a building that has a tin roof on it, you just stop. You can't teach it. I think we had the same problem in the Philippines. I had classrooms I was supposed to be in, and it would start raining, and the whole class just stopped because you can't hear anything. It's like living under the cymbal on a drum set. In the summertime, though, it's actually worse because it's like being inside a convection oven. It's awful. That sun just beats down on that tin and just radiates through you. It gets so hot you can't even think. People talk about that like it's some sort of a cute thing to say. You get really, really hot, you can't think. No, it's real. When you get really, really hot, when it gets up to 114 or something like that, and you don't have air conditioning or anything like that, your brain stops. You sit there on the edge of your bed and you say, I know there's stuff that I should be doing, but I don't know what it is and I don't really care. So that's a bit of an eye-opening experience to extreme situations. That's Lesejo on the left, and then that's Shelley. That was my family there. Now the Superior family, that Superior is Swana. Superior means baboon. So you can laugh at me and you can tell me I was a rabbit and I was a baboon, but I won't really know that you're trying to insult me. It's just kind of the way things work. I used to do workshops for teachers in South Africa. We did this as a group. A lot of the volunteers would pitch in on this. Basically, we were in charge of helping the local teachers adapt to a new curriculum. If you think about South Africa in 2005, basically this is 10 years after the switch over to apartheid, from apartheid, excuse me. Oh my gosh, that was a terrible thing to say. An entirely new curriculum came out and it was foisted upon the education system, and basically they all said, hey, get started on that. That'll keep you busy for a few years. And it really did because it was awful. But part of our job was basically to try and make sense of this to the local teachers because a lot of them never had any professional educational experience at all. I have a great story about one of the best teachers that I ever met. Fantastic guy. I wish I was as good a teacher as he was. The man was electric. He used to teach 4th grade social studies. He'd walk into the class and the whole class was just drawn dead on him. He never had to even put any effort into it. It was fantastic. The guy was magical. When I think about the teacher that I want to be, I think about him. And I asked him one time, I said, this is really great. I'm so glad that you're a teacher. This is obviously the perfect profession for you. I said, how did you get into this? He said, you really want to know? I said, yeah. He said, I was walking down the street in a town near my village, and a truck pulled up, and a white guy leaned out the window and said, hey, you want to be a teacher? And I said, okay. And he said, get in the back of the truck. And that was it. That was basically his training, and that was his introduction to the world of education. But I can tell you what, if there was one person in the world who could have actually made it through that system and become a fantastic teacher, that was the guy. Just by stroke of luck. If there's any proof to me in the world that there is a God, he was there at that moment at least. I'm going to move away because those pictures of me with hair, that depresses me. This was just a year ago when I was in the Philippines. This, just to give you the idea that you might be actually doing something that's not just in a school. I taught education at a university in the Philippines for 3 years. That was what I was doing up until summer of last year. They handed me the classes that nobody wanted to teach. And one of those was developmental reading. Now, if you have any education background, you know that developmental reading is one of the most boring, longest, driest subjects that are out there, mostly because we all take reading for granted. Well, they gave that class to me along to co-teach as well with the woman who was going to retire at the end of the semester. And ordinarily, you would think that would be just a recipe for disaster, but it actually turned out to one of the most successful things that I've ever been involved with in Peace Corps, and definitely had a huge impact on the university because I had been working with these students for at least 2 years, and I said, wouldn't it be great if we could actually get them into a classroom to teach reading? And she said, heck yeah, that would be wonderful. She didn't care. She was leaving in 6 months. So we set it all up, and we went back through and we picked all the curriculum out from what's called the Florida Center for Reading Research. They actually publish free materials that are intended for classrooms in the States. We set up the whole course so that basically our students had to take those materials, they understood the principles behind it, they understood the teaching process that was involved, in other words, the specific strategy. If you have any education background, I'll use the jargon there. And then they had to actually adapt all the materials for the local language, and then they went into the classrooms and they actually team taught it together. And it was fantastic. The kids loved it, the teachers loved it, the principals loved it, our students loved it. My boss in the education department at the university absolutely loved it because nobody wanted to teach this class to start with. We did a full-scale research project. We had all this stuff thrown in together. We had it all. It was beautiful. And this was the crowning moment. And I didn't even realize the gravity of this picture as I was taking it. I was just there to sort of document what we were doing. This is a public school. This is a regular kid. He's in this class because his teachers either think, A, he's a bad kid, or they think, you know what, he needs help with reading. Probably it was the second part. Maybe a little bit of the first part if you look at his face. He looks like a little bit of a troublemaker. But the beauty of this situation, this particular moment, and I didn't even realize it until after I had taken the picture, was one of my students came up to me, and she's actually helping teach the class, and he had gotten really excited, and as I was taking the picture, he snapped, turned around, and held up the cards, and he's got that look on his face like, yatta, as they would say in Japan. He finally figured it out. He finally figured out what it was all about. The letter on the page made a sound. It was magical to him, and he was so psyched. And that was when he spun around and I snapped his picture. And the student came up to me after and she said, you got him right when he figured it out. Now all the lights went on in his head and he figured out that's what reading was about. The letter makes the sound makes the word. And so I didn't even realize until I was looking at it later, but he was so excited. And that just made me all the more excited. Now as a teacher, that's the moment that you look for. That's the one that you hold on to for decades to come. But the fact that it worked out for him makes me feel all the better about it. Other than that, that's my graduation ceremony. This was actually in April. If you just like to get a bit of a chuckle out of the regalia that's in use there. If you had a master's degree as I had, you got the spaghetti hat. And the fellow on the second from the right there has a PhD, and so he's got the baker's hat on. But again, light blue is for education. The fellow in the center is actually, he's in the agriculture department, but he was also a graduate of the largest university in the Philippines. And so he has a special regalia that's only in use by his graduates of that university. So that's why he's in a different getup. Other than that, I think that's pretty much all that I have for you guys. If there's anything that you would like to talk to me about, if there's something that you want to say, if there's something that I didn't actually explain well enough, or if you want to argue with me on the history of Peace Corps in terms of its use as a counterpoint to basically the cell structure of the communist government through the 1960s and the use of, oh, we can get into that another time, I'm sure. I'm more than happy to talk about those things. If you're thinking about this at all, please come and talk to me. If you're not thinking about it at all, it's okay. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure.
So I do want to say that any of the people that are in his class that haven't left yet,
They're gone.
They're gone. I was going to say, you can come back again next week because we'll have another one of these sessions and you won't have to listen to him talk.
There you go. Excellent. Thank you very much.